everybody, welcome to another month of Vine Path. My name is Mariana and I am the wine buyer at Baco's Wine and Cheese in Boston, Massachusetts. And every month I pick wines pertaining to a certain topic in the world of wine that we explore. This month we're exploring the wonderful grape Blaufränkisch. You may or may not have heard of this grape. It is well known in the world of wine, but definitely not an A-list grape, more like a C-list, I would say. But the more I get to know it, the more I think it should get more attention. I think it's a really interesting grape with a lot of history. So Blaufränkisch originates in the Austro-Hungarian part of the world. It can get confusing because in many parts it's known by different names. Blaufränkisch in Austria, Blaufränkisch referring to Blue Frank or Blue French, Kecrankos in Hungary, Lemberg in Germany and Washington State, and Frankovka in Croatia and Slovenia. So Blaufränkisch usually gives off soft tannins in its wine. It's more blue fruit forward. It's a very soil sensitive grape, meaning that depending on the soil that it's grown, it really takes on those characteristics. Other soil-sensitive grapes, for example, are Pinot Noir or Riesling. Non-soil-sensitive grapes would be more like Merlot or Cabernet Sauvignon. But because of this, you can really see the difference in styles from all over the world. Let's begin. Up first is the Rosé Pet Nat Bajta. Funny enough, I've actually recorded myself opening this bottle, and I've recorded this whole video, but because of technical difficulties, it was all erased and starting over, so you won't see me opening this, but this had a crown cap, and whenever you see a bottle with a crown cap, many times it means it's sparkling, though not all the time. Sometimes they are still. In this case, it is sparkling, and it is a pet nat. Just a quick reminder, a pet nat is short for pétillant naturel. It means the wine was bottled before it was done fermenting, and so it continues fermenting in the bottle. The CO2 stays in the bottle. It's a quick ancestral method of making bubbles. Much less complicated than the champagne method. Bajta is from Slovenia, from Kobal winery. And because it's pink, we know that there is a red grape present. In this case, 100% Blaufränkisch. So this is the family winery of Bojan Kobal, who is a rock star winemaker. He's collaborated all over Slovenia, but under his own winery, he wanted to make a variety of styles of wine. Kobal is located in northeast Slovenia, near the Austrian border in the Styria region, near the town of Tuš. It's part of the Halos wine region. This is an area that has 2,000 years of winemaking history dating back to Roman times. It's a very hilly area. A lot of the vines are planted on very steep slopes. Kobal actually mostly deals with white grapes like Pinot Grigio, Sauvignon Blanc. The only red grape it deals with is Blaufränkisch. The Bajta line in particular are all wines that Bojan wanted to make in an ancestral method, or how you would make wines thousands of years ago. And so let's try this pet nat. This is a gorgeous deep cranberry color. The nose is super alive. It's like blueberry, strawberry, lemon cream. The bubbles are tiny but very piercing. There's like a rich texture to this wine. It's very lush. I first get like red fruits like strawberry, cranberry, but then the finish is like blueberry lemonade. You can tell that the grapes were picked a little later in the season because there's a lot of concentration, and you can tell the grapes got very ripe. And this one is actually 12.5, which for a pet nat is, I would say, a little higher than usual. Because pet nats only go through one fermentation and not the two like a champagne would, they tend to be a little more in the 9 to 11 range. But if you start with really ripe grapes, you'll get a fuller bodied, more alcoholic wine. This is so delightful. There's a lot of misconceptions that pet nats can be overly funky. I would not categorize this as funky at all. I think anyone that likes a fruit-forward, fun, sparkling wine would love this. And you could drink this on its own. It's got so much going on, but I specifically would want this with some snacks, some pigs in a blanket, olives, cheese, keeping it simple. On to wine number 2, the 2017 Dika from Feravino. So now we're in Croatia. You'll see the word Frankovka on the label. That's another word for Blaufränkisch. Blaufränkisch was brought over to Croatia in the early 1800s, specifically the eastern part of Croatia in the Slavonian region, not to be confused with the word Slovenia. This is an area between Hungary, Bosnia, and Serbia. Feravino was established in 1804. It actually ended up becoming a co-op, but in 1997, the Kovačević family took over, and they make just straightforward Croatian wines. The word Dika actually means pride in Croatian. So this wine was made in stainless steel and then aged in 9 months in large wooden barrels. This way you get like a very stripped down version of what Blaufränkisch smells and tastes like. And notice this wine is 6 years old and it still smells super fresh, and you totally get the more like spice undertone. But off the bat on the nose I get juicy blackberries, some cherry, a little bit of anise. The palate is similar, more plums, really fresh acidity, juicy, uncomplicated. It's meant to be an everyday companion to whatever you have. I would definitely pair this with some pizza. But we're starting to see the characteristics of Blaufränkisch of being dark fruited, doesn't feel too heavy, doesn't feel too light, somewhere in between. So now we're off to upstate New York in the Finger Lakes region with Keuka Lake Vineyards Blaufränkisch from 2019. First, a little bit about the Finger Lakes. It's a fascinating wine region. It really got its start in the early 1800s in the town of Hammondsport. Similar story to a lot of New World winemaking regions. A minister planted grapes so that he could have wine for sacrificial purposes. With a lot of people moving to that region, it really took off. In fact, by 1900, 2,000 acres of vines were planted. A lot of these vines that were planted were actually vines used for table grapes, so not necessarily for winemaking. That all came to a screeching halt with Prohibition coming into effect in 1920. Luckily, decades later, farmers replanted, and the Finger Lakes was getting more traction in the 80s and 90s. One of the reasons the wines grown in this region weren't taken as seriously is because a lot of the grapes that were grown weren't Vitis vinifera. They were actually either American varietals or hybrids, which is a crossing of an American varietal with a Vitis vinifera. But nowadays, there's a lot of Vitis vinifera planted in the Finger Lakes that can withstand a lot of the harsh weather. And that's thanks to Dr. Konstantin Frank, who figured out that he could actually graft vines of Vitis vinifera onto American rootstock that is a hardier base for the vine, and then from there you can grow varietals that can withstand much more easily the harsh winters. So Keuka Lake Vineyards was started in the early 1990s by Mel Goldman. He fell in love with the region on a camping trip with his family, and by 1997 he'd moved there and started the winery with the help of a few friends. For example, Morten Hallgren from Ravine's Wines helped him out a lot. But nowadays he has winemaker Margot Fedekil as the head winemaker. She learned about winemaking out in California and moved back to the East Coast where she's from originally, and she's making quintessential Finger Lake wines in the Keuka Lake Vineyards. So let's taste. Here we go again with the plum and black fruit. I wrote a description on their website that once it was said I couldn't get out of my head. Wet tobacco leaves, which I think is the perfect like earthy, musky, herbaceous element that I couldn't put my finger on before. That's why it's good to taste with other people or read some descriptions to like get the juices flowing for what you're smelling and tasting. Very fresh up front, juicy texture, but then the backbone, there's that light tannin, light spice that's telling you like, oh, I can actually be paired with something a little heartier. Even some violets I smell. I would pair this with some duck confit, maybe some pork tacos, something kind of fatty and salty. And now we're off to the cradle of Blaufränkisch in Austria, specifically Burgenland, with the 2020 Moritz's Blaufränkisch. And Austria is a country that, even though most of the Blaufränkisch that I think of comes from Austria, Austria is a country where 2/3 of its wines, so about 67%, are all white. It's famous for its Gruner Veltliner, its Rieslings, but Blaufränkisch is sometimes forgotten. I think that's changing more and more. More people are taking it seriously. For example, Dorli Mohr, she is a winemaker and publicist in Austria. She actually has a Blaufränkisch summit every year, and all these journalists and winemakers, scientists get together and they talk about Blaufränkisch and its past, its present, and its future. And you can't talk about modern day Blaufränkisch in Austria without talking about Roland Wellick. In fact, his name is on the label. He's the winemaker behind Moric, and he started this winery with the intention of showing how Blaufränkisch is in different terroirs. This is actually the entry level. He has more single vineyards that are all planted in different soil types. This project was started in 2001. He really wanted to highlight that Blaufränkisch is the type of grape that, just like Nebbiolo, just like Pinot Noir, it really takes on the terroir it's grown in. This wine, all of the vines are about 15 to 20 years, so on the younger side, but getting a little more mature. The soil is limestone. And Dorley, who makes the Blaufränkisch Summit every year, describes this Blaufränkisch grown on limestone as very silky, a texture that's very soft and elegant, but still very much present, not light or watery. The nose is lovely, still a lot of like dark cherry, an underlying almost like mushroomy character. And yes, that silky texture we were talking about, very much present without being too dense. It's light on its toes. You can definitely compare this to Burgundy or even some stony Beaujolais, but this is its own category because you're getting things that you wouldn't get out of Pinot Noir. It's not this tannic as Nebbiolo. I would have this with a more serious dish, something like a pork chop. I think it's juicy character, but with the underlying minerality and tannin would go really well with a juicy pork chop, especially if it had some sort of fruit reduction. So for a relatively well-known grape, I didn't find as much information as I thought I would on the history of Blaufränkisch. I was a little surprised about that. Actually, Jancis Robinson, she just released at the end of January an article about Blaufränkisch and saying how people are getting more into it, but even Austrians are just starting to take it more seriously. I think it has a very bright future. I read a lot that the most beautiful expressions of Blaufränkisch are more aged, and unfortunately a lot of the stuff that's out in the market is younger. But I think we're going to start seeing older releases of Blaufränkisch because I think it has the structure to be a really age-worthy wine. I think we'll get more earthy, savory tones. And this month, for all the Vine Path subscribers, I threw in a salami from Babette's Table, their spicy soppressata. We're obsessed with Babette's Table at Baco's. It's a tiny production out in Vermont, world-class butchery. I had to negotiate with Haley to give our subscribers the spicy soppressata because I think it will go with all 4 of the wines that we tried today. The salty, fatty, and little kick of spice will complement the fruitiness of the pet nat, the acidity of the Dika, the minerality of the Moric, and the blue fruits pleasant in the Keuka lake. Thank you guys so much for joining me this month. I hope you enjoyed getting to know a little more about the grape of Blaufränkisch. I really look forward to its future and to hearing what you guys think about the grape. Cheers, everybody. See you next month.